There are four questions I think every EB5 investor should ask of any project. How confident can you be in getting your permanent residency? What do you actually own? How are you repaid? And how long will it take? Over the next 20 minutes, you'll have answers to all four.
This project has received I-956F approval. USCIS has reviewed the business plan, the economic study behind job creation, and the structure, and accepted them as meeting EB5 requirements. So when you file your I-526E petition, they're only looking at your petition. And because we're rural, you get priority processing and a 20% visa set aside. There are 3 tests an investor has to meet. 2 are your responsibility, proving the money was legally obtained, your source of funds, and admissibility. An experienced immigration lawyer handles both. The third, job creation, is our responsibility. 8 wells funded by 25 investors who need 250 jobs. Our economic report estimates 309 jobs, creating about a 24% job cushion. We're a different type of project. EB5 investors are the equity holders. You own the limited partnership interest in the fund, what the offering documents call the NCE, or New Commercial Enterprise, which controls the company that's creating the jobs. So you hold an indirect ownership interest in the project's assets. That's unlike most EB5 projects, where the fund lends to a developer who owns the project and the purse strings. It's funded entirely with EB5 money, no other owners. We don't own the assets. We manage and operate on your behalf and earn a profit interest only after your capital is recouped. Every project carries risk. Our experts selected a region with proven oil and gas reserves, an area that produced for decades but was underexploited by the technology available at the time. Not a speculative or unproven play. That's a different thing from exploration. And Michael, our VP of Geology, a degreed petroleum geologist with 47 years in the field, will walk you through exactly why in a minute. The goal was a project that created the necessary jobs in a rural location with the ability to pay investors capital quickly. We also structured the offering to put investors ahead of management. You're repaid before any distribution aside from expenses. That order is set in the company's agreement. It isn't up to management to decide. There are 3 levels of distribution. First, a 9% annual dividend from cash flow, which covers the fund's cost. We estimate that to be 4 to 5%. What remains splits between management and investors, so you can expect roughly 2 to 2.5% a year on an $800,000 investment. That's about $16,000 to $20,000 annually. Then targeted at the end of year 3, we return the $800,000 you invested. Once you're repaid, you don't exit. Most EB5 deals are loans. Once you're repaid, your interest payments stop too. Here, because you're an equity holder, you keep earning your dividend share as long as any class is outstanding. Once every investor has been repaid their initial investment, profit sharing begins. EB5 investors receive 35% of this program's net profits. Take that 35%, divide it across the number of investors who are limited partners, and that's an individual investor share. We built a calculator on our website, EB5Energy.com, so you can run the numbers yourself. One more thing worth addressing directly. What happens if your I-526E petition is denied? For reasons that have nothing to do with the project. Because we're generating cash flow early, rather than waiting years for a sale or a refinance, a denied investor becomes what the offering documents call a priority repayment recipient, moved ahead of the normal payout queue, repaid from the project's own ongoing cash flow. Everything I've talked about depends on our ability to execute the business plan. And that's where Mark comes in. Mark?
Well, thank you, Rupi. It's a pleasure to be here. I'd like to begin with the operating team. I have over 40 years of operating experience, and collectively, our team has worked on approximately 3,000 wells. But what matters is that we've seen most of this before. Before I get into the details, I want to describe the design principle behind all of it. This program wasn't built to prioritize profitability. It was built to minimize risk, to do everything reasonably possible to make sure it meets what an EB5 investor actually needs. Everything I'm about to walk you through is in service of that goal. Here's what experience buys you. In 2012, Michael and I were operating a large field in the Permian Basin of West Texas. A new well came in, producing far more water than expected, a disappointing result. A team without our experience might have written it off, but Michael reviewed the logs and recommended we sidetrack it into a shallower formation using Eric's frac design. That well went on to produce over 1,000 barrels a day. It was the second highest producing well in the basin that year, and the sidetrack cost about 30% of drilling a replacement. That's the same three people you're hearing from today. Michael Short is our vice president of geology. Before we committed, I asked him for one thing, whether this area could support a continuous drilling program, not just a single well. And it does. Eric Marshall is our vice president of operations. Michael tells us where to drill and why. Eric tells us how and when. There are three things that help us determine whether a project like this achieves our goal. First, we want a high degree of confidence that there's oil in the ground. Second, we want a high degree of confidence that we can get it out. And third, we want to make sure it's economically viable to extract. The first is Michael's. He'll show you two things, that this acreage has its own recorded production history, and that the technology and depth we're planning to use here has already been proven nearby in 10 comparable wells drilled 3 to 7 miles away using the same method at a similar depth that came in 61% higher than our own projection. Now, all of this is documented in filed public data. The second is a question of method, and you'll see it rather than hear it described. There's a 2.5-minute video showing exactly what we're planning to do, and Eric will walk you through the details afterward. The third comes down mostly to price, and it's the one thing nobody controls. But there's a tool for it, and I want to spend a moment on that before we go on. Commodity price is the risk we can't control, and it's fair to ask what we do about it. Producers manage it by hedging. One instrument we could use is a two-way costless collar. We set a price floor that protects us if prices fall, and in exchange give up the upside above a ceiling. Giving up that upside is what pays for the protection. So say oil is at $80 a barrel today. We might hedge part of expected production with a collar $15 wide in both directions, a $65 floor and a $95 ceiling. If the price falls to $50 a barrel, the counterparty pays us $15 a barrel on the hedged volume. If it rises to $110, we pay them $15. Between the two, neither side pays. And even at $65, the floor, our worst case inside the hedge, the project still meets the goals we've set out, including the targeted repayment timeline. How much we'd hedge, at what prices, and for how long, we can't determine today. The offering document gives us the ability to hedge, not the obligation, and nothing is contracted. What I want you to understand is that the tool exists and what it can do. So, is there oil? That's Michael's. Michael?
Thank you, Mark. On the map, you can see two yellow boxes. That's 1,280 acres, 2 square miles in Major County, Oklahoma. Section 8 on the left, Section 20 on the right, 640 acres each. Every green circle on this map is a vertical well drilled in this area. around 200 of them across the region. That shows you this is a well-established drilling area, not unexplored ground. But what we can say with precision is what happened inside our own two sections. 11 wells were drilled there between 1963 and 1989. 6 of those reached the Mississippi line. The reservoir our horizontal wells will target. The other 5 were drilled to shallower targets and never tested. Those 6 wells produced a combined 68,700 barrels of oil and over 4 billion cubic feet of natural gas. 5 of these wells are still producing today. Every well that reached our target formation produced from it. So what did the old wells miss? The Mississippi Lime Reservoir here is about 200 meters thick, 600 feet, but we aren't targeting all of that. The upper 100 feet is the sweet spot, and that's where our laterals will run. A vertical well that drills straight down through the target contacts 100 feet of it. Our wells turn 90 degrees and run roughly 5,000 feet inside that same 100-foot interval. 5,000 feet against 100 feet. That's 50 times the reservoir in contact from a single well. That's why we can reach oil the old wells couldn't. How's that actually done? The drilling and the completion process? Eric will show you in a few minutes. What I want to show you now is what some comparable wells recently drilled 3 to 7 miles from our acreage actually recovered. 10 horizontal wells were drilled from 2017 to 2024, 3 to 7 miles from our acreage. The dark red lines on the map represents those 10 wells. They were drilled using the identical methodology we plan to use. The same Mississippi Lime formation, similar depth, and 1-mile laterals. Peak oil per well averaged 483 barrels a day, ranging from 293 to 812. My original estimate, before I had access to these operators' actual results, was that we could count on 300 barrels a day at our peak, and that's the number we use in our original petition. Now we do have the results, and my estimate looks conservative. These 10 comparable wells have also averaged about 170,000 barrels of oil each to date. And on average, they're still producing about 40 barrels a day. Everything I've shown you rests on 2 separate bodies of production history. What the vertical wells drilled here in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s produced, and what 10 modern horizontal wells nearby have delivered. None of these numbers is a claim. Every barrel and every cubic foot I've cited is production that the operator is required to file with the state of Oklahoma. It's on the public record, and if you or your advisors would like to pull it up and verify it, I can give you what you need to do that research. Historical production doesn't guarantee future results, and nearby performance is a benchmark, not a guarantee. That's what's in the ground. Turning it into a producing well is Eric's job. Eric?
Thanks, Michael. Turning what Michael identified into a drillable asset is largely already done. On the slide here is the pad we recently built. We've secured mineral rights for 8 wells we plan to drill and submitted permits to the state of Oklahoma. 2 are in hand, 6 in the final stages of paperwork. With the first 2 permits, we've started drilling our first 2 wells. The capital raise so far has gone into getting these 8 wells under our control, the rights, the permits, the pad, and the first 2 wells. The next capital will go directly into drilling. Every well follows the same 5 steps. Prepare the site, drill the well, complete the well, install the commodity sales infrastructure, which involves connecting to the gas pipeline and setting oil tanks so it can be trucked to refineries. Then we actively maintain it through its productive life. Michael mentioned I'd show you how the drilling and completion actually happens. Rather than describe it, Here's a 2.5-minute video on exactly that.
The common misconception is that drilling an oil well taps into a pool of oil. In reality, oil and gas is dispersed throughout various layers of rock and migrate to the most porous areas. These areas are under enormous pressure from the weight of the earth above and dense rock below. By drilling a well, you create a low-pressure area, causing the oil and gas to be pushed towards the well. This begins with drilling a 1.5-kilometer horizontal well at a depth determined by our geologist. A perforating gun is then inserted. Creating foot-long fissures in the rock formation. Fracking fluid is then pumped into the well at extremely high pressure, cracking the shale rock and creating fractures for trapped oil and gas to escape. Sand is injected to prop open the fissures. Newly fracked wells are initially expected to generate about 300 barrels of oil per day, then decline to about 100 barrels of oil per day by the start of year 2. Our focus is on the Mississippi Lime, a geological limestone formation rich in calcium carbonate that was formed through the deposition of organic material. The formation is approximately 200 meters thick and is renowned for its abundant oil and natural gas reserves. By fracking this horizon, we can extract 15 to 30% of the existing oil and gas resources. With existing surface equipment already in place, we can start producing oil immediately after completing the fracking process. Due to high oil and gas activity in Oklahoma, existing gas pipelines and oil tanks are readily available for transport from our sites.
We build the production facilities concurrently with drilling and completion, so there's no gap between finishing the well and selling from it. And every location we have is within a mile of an existing pipeline, so we aren't laying miles and miles of gathering line to connect. That's a real gain in operational efficiency. On cadence, drilling takes about 2 weeks. Completing the well takes another 2. That's the first 30 days. As soon as the well's on production, we can sell commodities, and we anticipate first revenue in the bank about 8 weeks from starting to drill. Here's a comparison you'll recognize. Real estate. Real estate reaches revenue in 3 stages. You construct the building on time and on budget. Then you find tenants to lease it. And then at that point, the developer or owner goes back to the bank to refinance using their now producing project as collateral. We only have 2 stages in that we drill and complete the well. That's our construction phase. Then we sell our commodity. We're already under contract to sell oil and gas the minute we produce, with buyers in place for the life of the well. What can move our schedule comes down to weather, rig availability, and service company scheduling. Those are things we deal with consistently and generally work around, but they're real variables. We originally projected our wells would average about 300 barrels of oil a day in the first month, plus around 1.2 million cubic feet of associated gas. That's the number that justified developing this area in the first place. But it's a projection, not yet a measurement from our own wells. Production declines over about 20 years, and the majority arrives in the first 2 to 3 years, which lets the well pay back quickly and keeps producing for years after that. Ruby?
Thanks, Eric. You've just heard how we generate cash flow. I want to come back to how that cash flow gets you repaid. The difference between our project and a typical EB5 project isn't that one has risk and the other doesn't. Every investment has risk. The difference is how many things have to go right before investors can be repaid. In a typical commercial real estate project, the development has to be completed. It has to be leased and occupied. The income has to stabilize. And then, sometimes years later, the developer generally has to go to a bank to refinance the property before EB5 investors can be repaid. In our case, the development phase is much shorter. We drill and complete the well, begin producing, and sell the oil and gas through sales agreements already in place. Revenue can begin within roughly 8 weeks of starting the well. On the commercial real estate side, it's a transaction someone else has to agree to. A bank has to look at the value and decide if the project is creditworthy. In our case, it's cash flow from operations, so we still carry drilling risk and production risk, but the cash used to repay you comes from operating cash flow, rather than some future refinancing or sale.